On a warm spring evening in Maplewood Park, two children, 12-year-old Amara and her 10-year-old brother, Kai, were riding their bikes, the sun casting a golden glow on their laughter. The park was a well-loved community spot, with green lawns, colorful playgrounds, and families enjoying the pleasant weather. It was a familiar and safe haven for the siblings, where they had spent countless weekends playing with friends and making memories. But on this particular evening, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. A small police patrol car rolled up to the park, the sound of its tires crunching on the gravel breaking the serenity of the moment. Two officers stepped out, their expressions tense and suspicious. Amara and Kai exchanged confused glances, sensing the abrupt change in the air. "Stop right there," barked Officer Reynolds, a stocky man with a furrowed brow. He crossed his arms over his chest, his posture rigid as he approached the children. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice harsh and unyielding. Taken aback, Amara stammered, "We're just riding our bikes, sir." Reynolds narrowed his eyes, unimpressed. "Open your bag," he ordered, gesturing towards Amara's backpack with an air of authority. As Amara hesitated, Kai, noticing the growing tension, stepped back, his face reflecting his concern. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered to Amara, fear creeping into his voice. Without waiting for an answer, Reynolds thrust his hands into Amara's bag, rifling through her belongings as if searching for something sinister. Amara's heart raced. She couldn't comprehend what she had done wrong. She felt a deep sense of humiliation, her cheeks burning as she glanced at the second officer, a woman named Officer Patel, who stood silently by, her demeanor passive. "We received a report about suspicious individuals in this area," Reynolds barked, glancing up at them. "Show me your IDs." "What? We've been here a million times," Amara protested, tears welling up in her eyes. The familiar park felt like a foreign place now, filled with hostility and fear. "Should we call Dad?" Kai whispered, looking at Amara with wide eyes. "Yeah," she nodded, her voice trembling. As she fumbled for her phone, Reynolds' demeanor shifted. "Who are you calling?" he snapped, his voice rising. "Put that phone down." Ignoring his demands, Amara pressed the call button, her fingers shaking as she dialed. Her father, Marcus, was a distinguished diplomat, often engaged in negotiations on behalf of his country. As the phone rang, Amara felt a mix of dread and hope. Maybe he could help. In his office, Marcus was engrossed in discussions about international trade when his phone buzzed. Seeing Amara's name on the screen, his heart sank. He answered quickly, "Amara? What's wrong?" "Dad, the police. They're searching us. They say we're suspicious." Her voice broke, and Marcus felt a wave of anger surge through him. "Stay calm, Amara. I'm on my way," he said, his diplomatic training kicking in. But beneath his composed exterior, he felt a boiling rage. This was not just an incident involving his children. It was an act of racial prejudice, one he had fought against in boardrooms across the globe. As Marcus made his way to the park, the sense of urgency grew. He felt helpless as thoughts of his children being treated unjustly filled his mind. He parked his car hastily and rushed towards the playground, his heart racing with every step. When he arrived, the sight was distressing. Amara stood with tears streaming down her cheeks, and Kai looked frightened, glancing nervously at the officers. Marcus approached them with determination, his voice steady but filled with authority. "Excuse me, officers," he said, his presence demanding attention. "I'm Marcus Jenkins, their father." "What is going on here?" Reynolds straightened up, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He realized he was now facing someone of significant influence. We received a report." "Reports don't justify unjust treatment of children," Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. "What were you thinking, searching my children without cause?" Reynolds stammered, struggling to find words, while Officer Patel shifted uncomfortably. Marcus's anger was palpable, and the other officers in the vicinity began to take note of the escalating situation. "I want to know who initiated this ridiculous search," Marcus demanded, his voice rising. "You are aware these children have done nothing wrong?" Officer Patel finally spoke up. We were just following standard procedures. There was a complaint. Complaints? Marcus's tone was icy, filled with incredulity. Standard procedures or blatant prejudice? You chose to harass innocent children based on assumptions. As Marcus confronted the officers, tension thickened in the air. Other park-goers, witnessing the unfolding drama, began to gather, their murmurs of disbelief growing louder. The reality was clear. A father was standing up for his children against an unjust system. "I want to file a complaint," Marcus declared, his eyes narrowing. "This needs to be addressed formally. What happened today is unacceptable." The police officers exchanged glances, their earlier bravado faltering. They had not expected this kind of confrontation, especially from someone of Marcus's standing. Realizing the situation was spiraling, the precinct commander, Chief Adams, was summoned. When he arrived, his face showed a mix of concern and irritation. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, attempting to defuse the situation, "I understand your frustration. We'll investigate this incident thoroughly." "Investigate?" Marcus retorted, incredulous. "This isn't just a mistake. It's a reflection of systemic bias that exists in your department. You think an investigation will make everything right?" Adams faltered, realizing he was dealing with a man who wouldn't back down easily. "I assure you, we'll take your concerns seriously," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "But it's not enough." Marcus shot back, gesturing to his children. "You have traumatized them for life. I refuse to let this slide without accountability." The gathering crowd began to voice their support, echoing Marcus's demands. This wasn't just about him. It resonated with many who had experienced similar injustices. "This isn't just an isolated incident," Marcus continued, addressing the onlookers. "It's part of a larger issue that we cannot ignore. Racial bias within law enforcement has gone unchallenged for too long." As the murmurs grew, it was clear that this wasn't just a moment of outrage. It was the beginning of a movement. The police department's credibility was at stake, and they knew it. After a heated exchange, Chief Adams reluctantly agreed to arrange a public apology and initiate an internal investigation. Marcus watched as the chief's demeanor shifted from defensive to somewhat conciliatory. But he remained resolute. Apologies weren't enough. "Public acknowledgement isn't where this ends," Marcus said firmly. "We need reforms in your training programs. We need community discussions about bias and prejudice. This cannot happen to anyone else's children." The next day, the story made headlines. The incident at Maplewood Park ignited discussions across social media platforms, where videos of the altercation circulated widely. Public outrage grew, prompting calls for action from community leaders and local activists. At a press conference, Chief Adams stood behind a podium flanked by officers, including Reynolds and Patel. "We acknowledge our mistakes," he began, addressing a packed room of reporters and concerned citizens. "The actions of our officers were not justified, and we apologize to the Jenkins family for the distress caused." As the camera lights flashed, Marcus sat beside his children, holding their hands tightly. When it was his turn to speak, he rose, his voice steady and clear. "I appreciate the apology," he began, "but we need more than just words. My children, and every child in this city, deserve to feel safe. No child should fear law enforcement because of their skin color." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the reporters and the audience. "This incident highlights a systemic problem that cannot be ignored. We must push for change, not just within this department, but in our entire community. We need to foster understanding and ensure that officers receive the training necessary to eliminate bias." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Marcus continued, "We must establish an independent commission to investigate cases of police misconduct and bias. This is just the beginning of our fight." Outside the police station, supporters had gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "No More Racism in Policing." The crowd chanted for change, their voices a powerful echo of Marcus's determination. After the press conference, Marcus walked among the protesters, shaking hands and expressing gratitude for their support. Amara and Kai stood beside him. Their initial fear transformed into a sense of pride. They understood now that standing up against injustice was not just their father's fight. It was their own. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the crowd, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The battle for justice would be long and arduous, but he felt hopeful. Change was possible, and it started with voices like theirs. In the days that followed, community meetings were held, bringing together citizens, police officers, and activists. Discussions focused on building trust, understanding biases, and ensuring that everyone felt safe in their neighborhoods. Marcus participated actively, sharing his family's story and advocating for real change. Amara and Kai watched as their father transformed the trauma they had experienced into a platform for progress. They learned the power of their voices, realizing that even in the face of adversity, they could stand strong and demand justice. As the movement grew, local leaders began to take notice. Policies were introduced to ensure that all officers received comprehensive training on racial sensitivity and community engagement. The department announced plans to establish a community advisory board, where residents could voice concerns and collaborate with law enforcement. Months later, the Jenkins family found themselves at another community event, this time celebrating their victories. Marcus stood on stage, surrounded by familiar faces, each representing a community member who had joined the fight for justice. "Together, we have made significant strides," he said, his voice filled with hope. "But our work is far from over. We must remain vigilant, continue to challenge the status quo, and ensure that our children can grow up in a world free from fear." Amara and Kai stood in the front row, beaming with pride. They had witnessed firsthand the transformation that could happen when a community united against injustice. They felt empowered, knowing their voices mattered and that they could be agents of change. As the crowd erupted into applause, Marcus looked down at his children, feeling a surge of love and pride. This was their legacy, a commitment to standing against injustice and striving for a better world. The journey was ongoing, but together, they knew they could face any challenge. The warmth of community surrounded them, a reminder that love, justice, and unity could prevail in the face of adversity. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood hand in hand, ready to embrace the future and continue their fight for justice.